Here at Safeguard, we've been beating the drum on disliking bonds for quite a while, and with the current state of the bond market, it's easy to see why. Right now, the bond market is off to its worst start in decades. It's down over 9.5% year to date, but this is before inflation. If we factor in the high inflation we've been seeing, bonds are down nearly 15% on the year. This isn't exactly the safe investment that many investors originally thought. Well, there is one type of bond I think investors should own. This government guaranteed bond has paid investors 7.12% on an annualized basis over the past 6 months, and over the next 6 months is guaranteed to pay investors almost 10% on an annualized basis. Now, the bond that I'm referring to is one that I find not a lot of investors are familiar with. They're called IBONDs. Now, an IBOND is a treasury-backed government guaranteed bond, so it's very safe, that's designed to keep up with inflation. Now, right now, there are two forces that make bonds as a category very unattractive to investors. The first force is rising interest rates. Now, bonds move inversely to interest rate changes. So as interest rates rise, bonds lose value. This is a big reason why bonds are significantly down so much this year so far. Now, the longer duration bond you have, the more susceptible they will be to these interest rate changes. Now, on the screen is an example showing how bonds within the bond market are affected by a 1% rise in interest rates. As you can see, the longer duration bond that you have, the more you will be affected by interest rate changes. The second force that makes bonds undesirable is high inflation. Now, high inflation is terrible for fixed interest investments. And over the last 12 months, inflation's been running fairly hot, averaging 8.5%. So let's say that you're an investor that has money allocated to a CD that's only been earning 1% over the last 12 months. On paper, it looks like you've made money. You've made 1% on a nominal basis, but you've actually lost over 7.5% because your money today is less valuable than it was 12 months ago, and your return on that CD has not been able to keep pace with that higher inflation. So given these two forces, why the heck would we look at investing in another type of bond? Because I-bonds are designed to overcome these two drawbacks. They have no interest rate risk, and they're designed to keep up with inflation. So let's talk about how an I-bond works. There are two elements that make up the interest rate that you earn with an I-bond. The first is a fixed interest rate element. Now, this is one that is guaranteed for the life of the bond. It will not change. And in this low interest rate environment, your fixed interest rate for purchasing a bond right now is 0%, meaning that if we don't see any inflation, you will earn 0% on this bond moving through time. The next element is a variable interest rate that is based on the current inflation rate. Now, when you first purchase an I-bond, you will have a 6-month period where that variable interest rate is locked in from the time that you purchase that I-bond. It will then update every 6-month period to reflect the current inflation rate that we are seeing right now based on the CPI-U index. Now, these rate adjustments are announced in May as well as November. Now, over the past 6 months, I-bond investors have been guaranteed a rate of 3.56%, annualized to 7.12%. Over the next 6 months, I-bond investors are guaranteed a rate of 4.81%, annualizing to almost a 10% rate of return. Now, compared to other bonds with additional risks, this is an incredible offer to investors. As we move through time, inflation rates will change, and therefore the variable interest rate will also change. And so an astute viewer may ask, what happens if we exit the high inflationary environment and we actually enter a deflationary environment? Does this mean I will lose on the I-bond? You will earn a negative return on the I-bond. And the answer is no. The interest rate on an I-bond can never fall below 0. So let's first talk about how you go about purchasing I-bonds. So any individual with a social security number that meets one of these 3 criteria can purchase I-bonds. Now, the easiest way to purchase I-bonds is directly through the government's Treasury Direct website. You can go in, create a login, create an account, and purchase I-bonds as well as track and redeem I-bonds on an ongoing basis. You can also purchase paper bonds as well if you so choose. Now, the biggest drawback to these bonds is there's a relatively small cap in how much you can purchase in I-bonds in any given year. In each calendar year, an individual can purchase up to $10,000 directly in I-bonds. Now, there is a $5,000 add-on where if you show a tax refund on your tax return, you can purchase up to $5,000 in extra paper I-bonds. This can be done by filling out Form 8888. So for those wanting to increase their IBOND limit, you may want to think about actually having a tax refund at the end of tax season. For a married couple filing jointly on a calendar year basis, you could each purchase up to $10,000 in IBONDs, as well as an extra $5,000 on your annual tax return if you have a tax refund. Another positive for IBONDs as opposed to other bonds is actually their tax status. So generally speaking, with most bonds, you never want to hold them in a taxable account. This is because holding bonds in a taxable account generates interest each and every year. That interest is taxed at short-term capital gains, or otherwise known as ordinary income rates, which means it's taxed at your highest marginal rate, which ends up being a tax drag on your taxable account. Now, IBONDs are a little bit unique because you actually have two options to control the taxation of your bond. You can choose to be taxed as normal. You can pay taxes on the interest each and every year, or you can choose to actually defer the taxes on the interest until you redeem the bond. It's important to note that the interest on IBONDs is taxed only at the federal level and not taxed at the state or local level, as well as you can only hold an IBOND in a taxable account. You can't hold IBONDs in traditional IRAs or Roth IRAs. Now, IBONDs do have some liquidity constraints that are worth noting. For instance, you have to hold an IBOND for at least 12 months before you're able to redeem that given IBOND. And you can only hold that IBOND for a maximum of 30 years before it matures. Now, if you try to redeem an IBOND that you've held for more than 12 months, but less than 5 years, it will cost you 3 months worth of interest as a penalty for redeeming early. So we see that IBONDs can be very attractive based on keeping up with inflation. But how should you integrate IBONDs into your retirement? Despite the small purchase limit, IBONDs can be a great alternative for safe money that you don't need within the next 12 months. And so they kind of operate in a middle ground between cash and an intermediate bond. And from a yield to safety standpoint, there's really no alternative investment right now that comes close to matching this risk return profile. Remember though that you must hold IBONDs for at least 1 year. Now, from years 1 to years 5, remember that there also will be a 3-month penalty for redeeming your IBOND early. Now, personally, I don't weigh this penalty very heavily because of the risk-return trade-off you're getting with that given IBOND. If you purchase an IBOND right now and hold that IBOND for 18 months before redeeming it, note that you really will only receive 15 months worth of interest because of that 3-month penalty. That being said, comparing to other short-term bonds or even cash, receiving 15 months worth of interest from an IBOND will be significantly better than any other fixed interest rate you could have received. Furthermore, for most of my clients, I recommend that they defer taxes until they redeem that given IBOND. This way we have complete control over their annual tax return, and we're deciding to take that taxable event when we redeem those given IBONDs. But in the big picture, aside from IBONDs, I think most bonds are a bad idea for investors. In this low interest rate environment, with rising interest rates as well as high inflation, most investors need to drastically lower their expectations from what they think bonds will be for their retirement. Here's a video explaining why a little bit more in depth. Bonds aren't the safe investment that we've historically thought they were. That being said, I think IBONDs are the one bond that can break this mold and be a great diversifier and offer a higher yield to investors. Always remember, you don't need more money, you need a better plan. Thanks for watching.